Hello team, welcome to my session on Coffee with Prab, and today we're going to cover a high level overview of CRISC Domain 1 governance. Yes, this video is based on the new version of CRISC which is revised in 2021. In this session, we're going to discuss a very high level overview, and along with that, I'm also going to cover some important points and topics which required for your exam preparation. If you're new to my YouTube channel, do subscribe to my YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to make sure you should not miss my future videos. My name is Prab Nair. For more information, you can refer my LinkedIn profile. So without wasting a time, let's move to the first part of the domain 1. Thank you. So I thought domain 1, I will start with the very basics like threats, vulnerability, likelihood, impact, countermeasure, and residual risk. So domain 1 approx 39 questions are there in the exam. From domain 1, 39 questions you can expect. Around 26%, 27% is testable from the domain 1. Okay, so you have to be very careful with the domain 1 because domain 1 is the base for the entire CRISC. Because until unless you're not clear with the basics, it is difficult for you to answer in the real exam. And I have seen people failed in CRISC exam because of the lack of understanding of the basic concepts. So here the first term is called as a threat. So threat is any action that compromise the vulnerability and by which they gain access to the system. So example like hacker is a threat, virus is a threat. Okay. Some question in the exam, you have no idea that is a threat, right? If they ask, then you gone, right? So threat is an action that compromise the security by exploiting the vulnerability. So vulnerability is the second important thing which is called as a weakness. I already explained the introduction of the threat and vulnerability in my serious introduction session. But if you haven't seen that, let me explain it again. So there is a virus which going to attack the server. So this is the server we have. So virus discovered that there is a vulnerability, there is a weakness in the server is that there is no antivirus. So no antivirus is mean that no control. So, and that is a weakness. So virus is an action which attack the server by exploiting the vulnerability of the no antivirus. And by this way, what happened is server was basically down. And the server, when it down, it directly have a negative impact on the business. Live example, Facebook. Just 2-3 months back, when the Facebook was down, it has a direct impact on the market, right? So that is how we have an action. Threat is something which exploit the vulnerability of an asset and by which it create a negative impact on the organization. Now, what is likelihood? Likelihood is basically called as a chance of occurring. When threat exploit the vulnerability, this condition is basically called as a likelihood. What is the probability that threat is going to exploit the vulnerability? Always. So likelihood is all about an action. And if this perform, then what is the impact on the server? Live example, Japan. In Japan is always prone for earthquake. So likelihood of earthquake going to damage the assets are high. And if it happen, the impact is also high. If we have a more people in that area. One more example is we have a house one and we have a house two. House one is made up of wood and house two is made of stones. Now when we say fire, fire is basically a threat. If it's occur on the house one, okay, and fire occur on the house two, both are basically having a same likelihood. It means probability of having a fire in both house is always high. But we would like to know what is basically the impact. The impact will be very high in the case of the wooden house. It get more damage because it is made up of wood. But the impact of the stone based house will not be that much. So this is how we're measuring the impact. Our primary goal is to ensure that okay we should reduce the impact, and that is why we have introduced the countermeasures. So countermeasure is basically introduced to reduce the impact. Okay, countermeasure is a reactive. Okay, so we have installed the extinguishers, we installed the defense in depth, that is called as a countermeasures. And after implementing a control, the risk which is left, that is basically called as a residual risk, because 100% risk cannot be eliminated. One more important risk we have which is called as an inheritance risk. So thin line difference between the inheritance risk And residual risk is a risk which is left after the treatment. And inheritance risk is basically the risk which is before treatment. I can see a complex situation in my organization. So something sometime we have to accept because there is no control on that. Like number of transaction happening in the financial services. It is difficult to audit. So that is a default inherent risk we have in the facility. Or my building is basically built in the location which is prone for threats. It's an inherent risk. So that is a risk which is there without treatment. We basically do the risk management on the inherent risk and try to reduce the impact. So after doing a treatment, the risk which is left, that is called as a residual risk. So we multiple time talking about risk. So risk defined as a combination of a likelihood of an event and it is impact, which affords the opportunity for benefit, okay, or peril to a success downside. So risk and opportunity go together. CRISC exam, if you pass, you get an increment. So you took the risk to go for the CRISC exam because you know if you clear this exam, there is a hike of $10,000. So you consider CRISC as an exam, as a risk, as an opportunity. You accepted the risk because along with that, there is an opportunity with you. But you know that if even you clear this exam, boss is not going to give you increment. Even he got to know that you clear the exam, there is a possibility they might terminate you. And there is no sponsorship. So in that case, you're taking serious as a negative opportunity. Okay, because if you fail, you have to pay from your pocket and you have lost $750. So sometimes risk is considered as an opportunity, risk is considered as a reward, but sometimes risk is considered as a liability also. So managing risk and opportunity is a key strategic activity for the enterprise success. Okay, so when you're talking about the element of risk, so when you're talking about the element of risk identification require the documentation and analysis of the element that comprise the risk. Example, consequences associated with the asset if threat is going to exploit the vulnerability. The threat is basically called as those assets required both intent and capability. That is basically the threat we have, which is an action. And third is basically called as a vulnerability, which is specific to the threats. Okay. If server is there, what is the consequences? If server is down, we can only get to know when we know the value of the assets. So I contact the asset owner and I got to know that if this asset is basically worth $30,000 and if there is a hacker is going to exploit this particular server, then there is a loss of $10,000. So that is the consequences we have with the asset. So we need that visibility. Then we need to know the possible threats. Hacker is there, internal employees are there, okay, natural is there, flood is there. So that is basically the category of the threats, and then we pen down the vulnerability. So that is why I say when we wish to identify any risk which is called as an impact, I should know the consequences, I should know the threats, I should know the vulnerability, I should know the asset value. It's very important for us to know that. So when you're talking about the risk management ultimate goal, if you're talking about the risk management, ultimate goal is to mitigate the risk to an acceptable level because 100% risk cannot be eliminated. So risk management cycle or framework is categorized into four functions: IT risk identification, IT risk assessment, risk response, and risk and control monitoring and reporting. You can say like that entire C-risk syllabus is basically captured in this element only. You can say entire series exam is based on these four elements. So these are the four important element we have for the risk management. Now, if I go by the first step, which is called as a IT risk identification. So first step in the IT risk management process is the identification of IT risk, which includes about determining the risk context, risk framework, enterprise risk appetite, and tolerance level, and the process of identifying and documenting the risk. Risk identification efforts should result into the listing and documentation of a threat, which is posed to the organization assets, efficiency of existing control, any personal process and technology may be vulnerable, any weaknesses, okay, and the potential harm which is introduced should the threat be realized, which serve as an input for the next phase of the process. So you can say like the high level, I can say in the risk identification, the first step is identify the context. Okay. Then second is basically called as a scoping. The third step is basically identifying the assets. Then fourth step is basically identify the value of the assets. When you're talking about the value, value is basically two type: qualitative value, okay, and quantitative value. Qualitative value like reputations and all that, which cannot be measured. Qualitative, and quantitative is basically monetary value. Then we talk about the threats, and then we talk about the vulnerabilities, and then we talk about the existing control, what we have. So that is something we perform in the first step. Okay. Context, scoping, assets. What is the assets we have? Contact the asset owner, identify the value of the assets, because it is very important to prioritize the controls. And when we're going for the control analysis, when we're going for the impact analysis, I should know the value of the controls. Sorry, I should know the value of the assets. So we identify the value of assets, which is called as a qualitative and quantitative. Then we try to identify the threats associated with the assets. We'll pen down the threats with the threat modelings or threat identification like natural threats, environmental threat, technical threats, non-technical threats, operational threats. And then we identifying the vulnerabilities, and we also identifying what are the existing controls we have. So we will accumulate all this information. So at least at the first stage, we got a visibility that we have some risk. But the question is that every asset has their own risk. We need to evaluate, okay, which risk has what impact. Until unless we don't evaluate the impact, we will not able to prioritize the control because we have a limited budget in which we need to manage the risk and manage the security of the assets. Definitely, we have a asset one, asset two. Asset one has a $10,000 value. Asset two is also $10,000 value. But we have discovered asset one, if has a ransomware attack, it will impact me $3,000. Asset two basically has a ransomware attack, it will cost me $4,000. So until unless I don't know the impact analysis in monetary or non-monetary, we cannot suggest the controls. That is why we have a second step here, which is called as a IT risk assessment. So assessment efforts require the analysis and evaluation of a threat in order to assess and prioritize the risk in context of the enterprise, define the risk appetite and the criteria for deviation where the risk tolerance would be increased and all that. So here we introducing a three terms. I'm going to cover that in the further slide. Let me bring that slide also so you get a visibility. So when we going for the risk assessment or we setting the risk framework, before that, we also need to set up the risk capacity and risk appetite and risk tolerance. This is the turning point of a C-risk. As a risk practitioner or as a C-risk aspirant, you must be familiar with these three terms. I will discuss back, I will go back and discuss the further steps. As we are in the second step of the risk assessment, we need to evaluate the impact with appetite. So without discussing appetite or capacity, it will like a buffer overflow for you. So here we're talking about risk capacity, risk appetite, and risk tolerance. Let me first explain with the layman term. So when I say risk capacity is like you're getting every month some $10,000 salary. Okay, 10,000 salary you withdraw every month. That is your risk capacity. Okay, that's why I said maximum risk the organization can afford or maximum risk one person can afford. Okay, so every individual has a particular risk capacity, and this defined as the objective amount of loss a person can accept without its continue existing being called into the question. Okay, and if you could take an example from an enterprise point of view, every enterprise has a particular risk capacity, and this defined as the objective amount of loss the enterprise can accept without its continue existing being called in a question. So this is something which is uh, set by the owner or the board of director. This can be the exam question. Who set the risk capacity? So it is set by the owner or the board of director. Risk, that is the most important thing. Okay. So here we have a risk capacity, which is my maximum salary is $10,000, which I will withdraw for every month. Now what happened is I decided to invest from the $10,000, my $5,000 in the mutual funds. Okay. Or some properties and all that. Everyone does that. From their salary, they take out some amount and they're planning to invest in some kind of a company and all that. So here I have invested around $5,000 from my overall $10,000 in a mutual funds or shares or any property investment. Okay. But there is a time, okay, in one of the month where I found there is a new mutual funds, there are some new shares, there are some new initiatives are there. Let me invest in that. Example, there's a new Bitcoin trend is happening in the market. So I decided, let me invest and let me increase my investment appetite. Okay, let me increase my appetite. So what I did, I increased my appetite from 5,000 to $5,500. So I increase my $500 here is appetite. Appetite. So what is appetite here? So this is basically my 5,000 was the appetite. Appetite mean amount of risk. There's a difference. Maximum risk or amount of risk. Okay, amount of risk that you have taken to pursue the mission. So risk appetite is defined as the amount of risk on a broad level that entity is willing to accept to pursue the mission. Okay, so here as an individual, I have decided to set the appetite of $5,000 as a mutual fund. Okay, then one day what happened? I increase my appetite level, which is called as a tolerance, to 550. So this has become my risk tolerance. So risk tolerance is basically defined as an acceptable level of variation. Can you see variation? The management is willing to allow for any particular risk. Now I'm going to discuss about the exam point. See, $10,000 is basically my risk capacity. By end of the day, I can invest maximum 10,000 in a month. I decided $5,000 as a risk appetite, which is fixed for every month, that I cannot exceed more than $5,000 for my mutual fund. But one month, I decided to increase my tolerance level of my appetite to 5,500, which is like extra 500 of deviation we have identified, which is called as a risk tolerance. Now, during a risk assessment, I discovered, please try to understand this point. It's a very important point. Okay. When you're doing a risk assessment, you identify any risk which is exceed my capacity. One thing you need to remember, in this case, it's better to avoid the risk. Okay, if my tolerance exceed my risk capacity, and even we investing control, we cannot bring back. And this is something is setting or exceeding my threshold of the risk capacity. In that case, avoid the risk. Okay, I'm going to discuss in a further slide, but here I'm just talking about the deviations. Okay, now what I did, I implemented some controls. Okay, and bring this deviation below the appetite. Okay, so that is called as a mitigation, and the risk which I bring below the appetite, this is the residual risk that I accepted. So anything which is below the appetite equal to appetite, we will accept. So risk capacity is the maximum risk the organization can afford to take. Risk appetite defined as the amount of risk on a broad level the entity is willing to accept in a pursuit of the mission. And risk tolerance is defined as the acceptable level of variation the management is willing to allow for any particular risk the enterprise pursue its objective. Okay, so that is why we said the risk capacity is this subject to the absolute maximum imposed by the risk capacity is set by the owner and the board of director. And when you're talking about the risk appetite is basically driven by the or delegated by the board of director to the senior management as a part of a strategic planning. And risk appetite is translated into many standards and policies to contain, you can say, the risk level within the boundaries set by the risk appetite. And these boundaries need to be regularly adjusted or conformed. And within this boundary, risk may be accepted formal or explicit process to affirm the risk which required and warrant no additional response by the enterprise as long as its risk environment stays substantially the same and accountability of the risk which is assigned to a specific owner. And risk tolerance, as I said, defined as an acceptable level of variation which management is willing to allow for any particular risk the enterprise pursue is objective. So that is what we have. Okay. So risk appetite and risk tolerance need to be defined and approved by the senior management. Remember this from exam point of view. Risk appetite and risk tolerance need to be defined and approved by the senior management with the process in place to review and approve any exception at the appropriate level of authority. And this information should be clearly communicated to all the stakeholder. Okay. So risk acceptance generally should not exceed the risk appetite of the enterprise. As I said, risk should be below the appetite, then only it is acceptable. In situation where risk tolerance exceed the risk capacity, we realize the event this could threaten the continued existence, so we will discontinue the things. Okay, that is a point I was trying to convey in my previous thing. So in situation where risk tolerance exceed the risk capacity, realized even this could threaten the continued existence of the enterprise, it's better avoid that particular risk. Okay, so let's go back to the risk framework topic. So as I said, we are back here. We already covered the risk identification and we are in a second stage which is called as a IT risk assessment. So as I said, assessment effort required the analysis and evaluation of a threat in order to assess and prioritize the risk in context of the enterprise who define the risk appetite. Okay, because if I identify asset, okay, if I identify asset and we identify threat and I identify vulnerability and I also identify the impact. This impact I need to map with the risk appetite, risk tolerance and risk capacity. Okay, right now the impact is exceeding my appetite, which is need to check about from a tolerance point of view. So according to that, we need to balance that. So in a risk assessment, we have a two type of assessment. Okay. One is basically called as a qualitative risk assessment and one is basically called as a quantitative. Qualitative assessment is measured through the likelihood and impact. Okay, probability of happening and what is the impact. And we rate them high, low, and medium. Someone asked me, Prab, how many questions we can expect? I said domain 1 is important. Domain 2 is important. But ISACA, what they did, they come up with the score. That okay, domain 1, you will get 39 questions. Domain 2, you get blah blah question. Domain 3. So this is something is a value is there, which is easy and it is help me to plan my activities. Understood, team? So that is called as a quantitative. But qualitative is that domain 1 is important. Without telling about the number of questions, they just said domain 1 is important. Okay. So that is the one. One more example of the qualitative risk assessment is during an audit, I discover some RFC does not have a adequate data. Some request for change samples of the change management does not have adequate data. Or during a log analysis, I discover some IP address has not defined the request configuration. What is the likelihood of this? High. What is the impact if they don't follow is also high. So rate it as a medium risk because it's an operational risk. So this is how we basically documenting a qualitative risk assessment and it is one of the fastest way to prioritize. Second is called as a quantitative where we're using a calculation. Virus is going to attack the server. What is the impact? $7,000. What is the cost of control? $8,000. Does it exceed my budget? $9,000. So this is basically come up with the quantitative values. So we have a monetary values. We use the universal currency which is called dollars by which we can able to prioritize the things. Then third thing which is missing here which is called as a risk evaluation where we evaluate the results and then we go for the risk response. So we have a four way to respond to the risk. We have acceptance. Okay. We have a avoidance. We have a transfer and we have a mitigation. Okay. Accept the risk, avoid the risk, transfer and mitigate the risk. In a high level, I can say uh, we basically we basically go for the acceptance of the risk in that case when it's equal to appetite or below the appetite as per C-risk. Okay, when the cost of opportunity is higher than cost of loss. Okay, cost of control is able to manage. So in that case, we accept the risk. Example, I got to know if I clear the serious exam, I will get a $10,000 salary hike. Right now, my salary is $1,000. So I accepted this risk. Even in a second attempt, I can clear the exam. I can able to compensate in a first month of salary. So let's accept the risk. So acceptance of a risk come with a business opportunity. Business is the one who accept the risk because they understood the cost of acquisitions, cost of opportunity is higher than cost of loss. So that is called as a acceptance. And one point remember from the exam point of view is that any risk below the appetite, equal to appetite, we will basically accept the risk. Second is basically avoid. Avoid mean we avoiding a source which bring risk to the organization. Okay, example like not traveling to the country where COVID cases are high. I'm not taking a risk. I'm not getting a business, and taking our acceptance of a risk going to that country is also high risk for my human. So it's better avoid that business which bring risk to the organization. So that is called as a avoidance of the risk. One more is discontinuing the application from the organization. Currently doesn't give me value. Continuing that application in the organization, it's a more risk for me. Or withdrawal my services from some country because of a legal regulatory issue. I'm not getting a revenue and it increasing a risk day by day for me. And currently it exceeding my risk capacity also. That is called as avoidance. Not booking the exam is like avoidance. I will save my $750. Third is basically called as a transfer. See, transfer mean you're transferring the impact to third party. In which condition we transfer? When likelihood is low, but impact is basically high. When likelihood is low, when impact is high. Example, I'm running my banking operations. Okay, I'm running a banking operation. I decided to move my IT service to the cloud to TCS. So now what happened? TCS is basically taking care of my operations. But this is not a transfer. Here, TCS will basically bond the payment for my downtime. If any point of time, if TCS application is basically down, okay, bank will not pay the penalty to the regulatory authority. Bank will collect the money from TCS, and then bank will basically collect the money from TCS, and TCS will compensate bank, and that is basically paid to the regulatory authority. By end of the day, bank is the one who answerable to regulatory authority. Any kind of a security breach happen in the TCS, it will be the bank only answerable to regulatory authority, but they will well compensate it from the TCS. So this is how we transfer the impact to third party. Like insurance, cyber insurance is the best example of the risk transfer. Okay, we take insurance. It doesn't mean okay, we will not face accident. If we face accident, in the case of hospital, medical claims, bills, and all that, it is borne by the third party. So this is how I transfer the impact to third party because likelihood is low. Not every day I will face the accident. But if I admit it in the hospital in one go, it has a huge impact on my pocket. So that is why I decided to transfer this particular thing to third party. And risk mitigation is basically mean implementing control to bring the risk below the appetite. That is basically called as a risk mitigation. So this basically provide the management with the information needed for risk response and mitigation, third phase of the cycle, which seek to implement the cost effective way to address the risk and has been identified and assess. Okay. Then once we implement the control, it doesn't mean we ignore. There is a possibility that the control which is implemented after that, there is a residual risk is left. If we don't give treatment to that, if we don't monitor that, there is a possibility residual risk exceed the appetite also. So final phase in a risk and control monitoring and reporting is we talk about here what is the function, what are the validations we have. Okay, so the process repeat the risk environment. In this phase, we're basically monitoring all the controls for the effectiveness. Okay, so IT risk management process is based on the complete cycle of all the elements. Failure to perform any one of the phase in a or failure to perform any one of the phases in a complete and thorough manner may result in a deficiencies being carried forward and cause the overall process to be ineffective. Okay, one more important thing which I miss in a risk and control monitoring, we also set the KRI KPI by which we monitor the risk is not exceeding my capacity or residual risk is not exceeding my appetite. So that kind of a things we have. Okay, The more often the risk management cycle is repeat, the more effective the IT risk management effort will be and more consistency the organization will see in the result they obtain. So risk management cycle need to be performed on a regular basis. The question is, what is the principle of the risk management? The most important principle, if I go for NIST based risk management, or if I go for ISO risk management, or if I go for any ISACA based risk management, I'm planning to adopt some framework and by which I want to implement the risk management in the organization. So, okay, that company has a great risk management. What is the principle of a good risk management? That's a question. So, principle of a good risk management is that it should connect to the enterprise business or mission. A good risk management is the one which covers the context and it relate to the business missions. It must be aligned with the enterprise risk management. Okay. It must help us with the balance of cost and benefit. It promote the ethical and open communication. Then only the risk management will be effective. Make sure it should be post support by the management, which is called establish the tone at the top and accountability. And most important is use as a consistent approach aligned to the strategy. Now, if you get a question, what is the principle of a good risk management? Answer is A, because by end of the day, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 point is mapped with the A only. If business approval are there, senior management approval are there, if it able to balance the cost and benefit, it mean the risk management is connect with the enterprise business. That what we have. Okay, so these are the principles of the good risk management we have. Let's move to the next part. Okay, so next part is called as a risk tiers. Tiers mean different type. Actually, we have a more than 6 type of risk, but here I'm just categorizing into three. And in next section, I'm going to cover about detailed risk tiers. So risk tiers is a type of risk. So here the risk must be considered all level. So we have a strategic risk, which is like a enterprise based. Okay, that is how it impact the overall business, which is changes to the market. Then we have a tactical risk, changes in the business operation, which is a department base. And third is basically called as an operational risk, which is challenges with the IT system and application base. One example I can give you where all the three are well related. Now there is a change in the regulation, and because of that, we need to change the strategy. So that is become a strategic risk. Okay, because of COVID, things went to automations, things went from work from office to work from home. So it directly impact the strategy. And a lot of business went bankrupt and all that. So that is basically a strategic risk, changes to the market. So according to that, we need to reevaluate the things. Now tactical is there is a some change in the business operations. Example, like we are doing a training. Initially it was a classroom training, now it become a online training. So if I don't continue the online training, then one impact of the business, one impact, or we can say one section of the business will get impacted, where we could not able to do the training online, so it has a huge impact. So that is a tactical risk. Then some data centers or some IT operations was down, it was not available, and because of that we cannot able to handle the load and all that. That is basically called as an operational risk. So if it's an operational risk, it's still manageable. If it's a tactical risk, manageable. But if it's a strategy risk, we need to give top priority to that. So from an exam point of view, always remember, whenever we go for risk management, we follow the top down approach. We first understand the strategic risk of that impact, then we try to understand how it impact the tactical and how it impact the operation. And for your information, your entire organization is driven by the vision, mission, like this way. So every organization has a vision which we convey to the stakeholders. Based on the vision, we have a mission. Then based on a mission, we have a strategy. Based on a strategy, we have a tactical plan. And based on a tactical, we have a operation plan. Okay, so strategic plan is called as a long-term plan. Tactical is basically a mid-term plan, and operation is a short-term plan. One example, strategy say that we need a continuous availability. Okay, we want to go for a digital transformations and we are looking for automation. We're going for a cloud solution. That is my strategy. Based on that, I adopted the BCP, I adopted the cloud solutions, I adopted the cloud architecture. That is part of a tactical. And because of that, I implemented the hot site or cloud site and all that. That is an operational. So we discovering some risk on the strategic level. We discover the risk on the tactical level. We discover the risk on the operational level. So that is how the risk will be considered. In detail, we also have other type of risk. As I said, specific risk which is corresponding to the category here. The first is called as a strategic risk, like changes in the customer preference. Now people are not coming for the classroom training, they are going for the online training. Things are getting changed, and changes in the customer preference or stakeholder preference or executive turnover, that is basically a strategic risk. Second is called as a environmental risk. Environmental risk is pollutions or disturbance of protected area, that is basically called as a environmental risk. Third is called as a market risk. Market risk is like a foreign exchange rates, availability of the commodities and raw material, that is part of a market risk. Then we have a credit risk. Credit risk is like interest rates, callable loans, damage to asset for which organization is an insurer. So that is basically called as a credit risk. Then we have a operational risk. Operational risk is basically all about employee error, fraud, theft. Then we have a compliance risk, which is failure to meet the regulatory, like failure to meet the RBI, SBI's, or sorry, failure to meet the RBI, failure to meet any regulatory authority, GDPR. That is a compliance risk. So this is how we organizing the different risks. But one thing I would like to add here is IT or IT risk is integrated with all the risk. Okay, here you can see that IT related risk is basically somehow directly get impacted because of the other things. Okay, so when you're talking about IT risk, what is the concern here? It's like IT benefits. Okay, IT programs. And third is basically called as a IT operations. Okay, so when I say IT benefit or value enablement, when delivered project do not create a expected value, projects are not delivered in a manner consistent with the plan, or delivered service fall short of SLA. So these also directly indirectly impact my strategic environment, market and credit and operational risk. So that is how we have. Now, when we're talking about the overall risk governance, okay, overall risk governance, okay, that is how it works. Okay, but before going to discuss about the governance of enterprise IT, I would like to play one video for you and explain you why governance is matter in the organization. Now, if you see this video, kindly observe this video carefully, okay? There's no sound. Now, in this video, if you notice, the person is basically just using one product which is called Sure for Man, whatever it is. And then he basically picked the item and he rushing toward the office, break the glass, and then he going for this jump, rule breaking, then this, and then this, like Ajay Devgan. No helmet, but still he wearing helmet. And now it's an entry of Akshay Kumar. So that is a live example. So in this video, what you notice, no rules, no regulation, everything is messed up and all that. So that is a perfect example of the lack of governance. So when you're talking about the governance, governance is all about direction. It's all about oversight. It is all about the policies. It is all about procedure. It is all about organization structure, organization hierarchy. Okay, that is called governance. Presence of policy, presence of organization structure, presence of accountability, presence of strategy is called as an evidence of a good governance. If police is there in the video, if cop is there, sorry, if cop is there, okay, he can stop or she can stop. Rules has been defined. If they're followed, enforced, no one can able to break the class in that video. That video shows a perfect example of the lack of governance. So governance is all about setting a direction. Governance is all about setting a strategy, oversighting, okay, building a organization structure. And management is all about planning and operations. So thin line difference between the governance and management is governance is basically evaluate the need and setting a direction. And management will basically plan, they will build, they will run, they will monitor and share the output with the senior management. It is very important that we need a proper risk governance. Okay. in the organization. Okay, and governance is not something which is confined to senior management and board or director. It is applicable to all the department within the enterprise. Now, in this diagram, sorry, you can see we have a board of director. They appoint senior management. This has happened. Senior management is basically creating a strategic plan, which is basically execute through the business units. And whatever the execution is happening, the output reporting are basically going to the senior management, and they will try to validate and verify whether it meet the mission and vision. In a more layman, I can say, as I said, every organization go with the vision, and then we have a mission, and then we go for the strategy, then we go for a tactical, and then we go for operation. So when the things are executing on the operational, that need to be aligned with the mission, that to be aligned with the strategy, that to be aligned with the vision. So that is why the business unit activity, whatever happening on the business operations, they need to provide the report to senior management to check whether we are compliance with their organization objectives and all. But parallelly, what senior management did, they also introducing a risk management activity. And risk management is the keystone of the governance. Accurate information is required so that we can able to convey or is required able to correctly understand the various threat and subsequent risk which is being faced and how the enterprise choose to respond that matters. So here the risk management is basically introduced in a business unit which proactively identifying risk associated with the business units. We introduce the KPI, we introduce the KRI for the risk monitoring of the business process and provide parallelly that report to senior management the risk associated with the business process. And that is how you are integrating a risk management in the department. That's why you can see supply chain, okay, hiring, project acquisition, okay, business acquisition, new initiatives. In that, risk management is already integrated so that proactively we can identify the risk associated in all the department and provide the independent report to the board or director or senior management. And that is a perfect example of the effectiveness of the risk management. When I say effectiveness of risk management, it means risk management and their activities are integrated in all the department. And risk optimization is essential for the success of any governance system and cannot be isolated as an enterprise will not able to properly plan and optimize resource nor realize benefit and without proper governance and risk management. Okay, that is why we said governance is all about direction and oversight. Management is planning and operation, and risk is a balance between the opportunity and loss. So here you can see for risk governance, the first important thing is stakeholder communication, input and output. If I go back, if you notice here, whatever the activity happening here, monitoring of risk on the business, we are giving a direct report to the senior management. So they have a complete visibility and make sure there should be accuracy of the data because based on the data only we do the monitoring. So the first principle of a good risk governance is the stakeholder communication input and output because we always follow top down approach. Another important thing for the effective risk governance in the organization is called as a risk culture. It's very important to have a risk culture. Now what is risk culture? It means open for discussion about the risk. Okay, acceptable level of risk are understood and maintained, set the directions, communication risk aware decisions, reward effective risk management behaviors, and imply that all levels are aware of how when to respond to events. That's called as a good example, good risk culture. It means people accepting those initiatives. They are not working on the blame culture. Okay, if they found something risk, we need to work on that, right? So risk culture is a most important thing required for the effective risk management in the organization. That is another exam point. So any question in the exam talking about effectiveness of risk management from the implementation point of view in the organization, the most important thing, risk culture must be there, in which management accept the risk, monitor the risk, see discussions, communications, no blame cultures, everyone having a open-ended discussions. That is basically the example of the risk culture. Okay, so risk management is defined as a coordinated activities, practice, and process that are used in an attempt to inform. Okay, to inform about the things what is happening, direct the people about the activity, and most important, influence the decisions. So, in simple term, risk can be viewed as a challenge to achieve the objective, and risk management as the activity undertaken to predict the challenge, lower their chance of occurring or their impact. And that is why the effective risk management can also assist in maximizing the opportunity, and the risk practitioner should keep this upside and downside duality of the risk in the mind. So, what is the role of a risk practitioner in the organization? So risk practitioner, before going to discuss about the point, here I would like to show you what is the context of the C-risk in the industry. Now what risk practitioner does, risk practitioner is basically understand the mission of the organization, they understand the vision of the organization, they understand the strategy, they understand the tactical, and they understand the operations. And then based on that, what they do, they build a complete framework. Okay, this is the framework we have. Okay, of risk identification, risk analysis, risk response, and risk control. And they will integrate everything in all the process. And whatever the output we get from this integration, that output is going to be analyzed and provide the report to the board of directors or senior management, so that proactively we can able to manage every risk what is happening in the organization. So c-risk is basically help us to build the framework. C-risk is basically help me to build the governance of risk management and their risk controls, by which we can able to protect the organization and run the business with the organization vision and all that. That is the goal we have. Now example, supply chain management, hiring process, project acquisition. In that, we integrating a risk management, we integrating a KPI, we integrating KRI, and this data will be pulled by the risk practitioner. Okay, and through that, he applying and suggesting a list of controls. So by this, proactively, we can able to protect the organization from all kind of a risk. So risk practitioner recognize the business in its appropriate perspective, pay the attention to comprehend the outline approach, find out a way to protect the acceptable technology and business process on a proactive basis. That is the most important thing. Establish the partnership that encourage the communication about the risk management functions and everything. And most important, whatever the changes we have, we can able to respond to them appropriately. Work to build the culture, which is called as a risk culture, which encourage open and informed risk conversations. Provide the advice on many elements of risk, but do not make the decision on behalf of the company, because your role is not to implement anything. Your role is to just suggest. You can suggest the consultant, you can suggest the owners, you can suggest the senior management, but you itself cannot implement anything. So that is a risk practitioner role. But what is your goal now? Okay, I understand this is my role, but what is my goal? First, provide the accurate, complete, and timely information. So provide the accurate, complete, and timely information required to make the best, most well-informed decision possible by the senior management. That is the first important goal of a risk practitioner. In your data, in your report, integrity play a very important role. Second is identify, assess, and advise the appropriate response. Definitely identify, assess, and advise with the appropriate response to the risk that has highest likelihood of occurrence and ability to impact that enterprise able to successfully achieve its goal and objective. That is the first goal we have. Make sure whatever the impact is happening is within the appetite or within the capacity and all that. So that is the next important thing. And third is allow for the ability to balance performance and conformance requirement that best suit the enterprise through the activity which is described the above. So summaries that provide the accurate data, identify and provide the necessary response suggestions. Boss, you can go with the elimination, you can go with the mitigation, you can go for the avoidance based on this impact, and balance the performance and confirmation requirement, which is called compliance with the legal regulatory requirement. So risk management goal is effective risk management is depending upon knowing the enterprise goals and objective that we have. So risk practitioner should understand current risk universe to assess the capability and overall maturity of the risk management program. Risk universe is something which capture all the risk data what we have of the organization. Second is understanding the business overall risk strategy that should be direct the risk practitioner to guide the development of IT risk strategy that align with the organization goals and objective. And risk practitioner also be careful not to focus only on risk from the perspective of one department but on a one process. So risk practitioner should consider the risk to the department, business partners, or overall business goals. And it can be easily for the risk practitioner to calculate the risk, which is reflecting the impact only on IT and forget to include the business process owner that those IT system doesn't support. So that's why a risk management program serve as an enterprise. So the risk practitioner must remember to look beyond his or own department. This is another exam question. Like when we're talking about integrations and all that, can we consider only the impact from one department, which is wrong? You need to consider all the departments, and from their point of view, you need to analyze the impact instead of just focusing on the IT and all that. And best way to understand the goals and objectives of the enterprise is to maintain the active dialogues and regular communication. That's the most important with the senior management. So as a risk practitioner, we should consult with the senior management to validate the understanding, okay, of the enterprise vision and strategy and how those translate them to the appropriate line of business. Like example, use of technology, growth, potential change in the priorities. So keeping in mind that that information or some information may be censored due to the ongoing negotiations or confidential strategic plan. So that's a most important thing that you need to perform. So in domain one, we have a first part which is called as an organization governance. So now if you're talking about the new version of series, they used to split every domain into two parts, part one and part two. So we're talking about part A, which is called as an organizational governance. So in the organization governance, the first part they're talking about the organization strategy, goals and objectives, in which they talk about organization strategy, goals and functions, importance and value of IT risk management, IT risk strategy of the business, alignment with the business goals and objective. See, when you're talking about IT risk strategy of the business, so IT risk is a business risk. Okay, IT risk is a business risk which is associated with the use, ownership, operations, involvement, influence, and adoption of IT within the enterprise. Understanding the business overall risk strategy helps the risk practitioner to guide development of IT risk strategy that align with the organization goals and priorities. All IT risk must be measured not only by its impact on the IT services, but also by the impact on the risk on business operations. So that is a point you need to remember from the exam point of view. All the IT risk must be measured not only based on IT impact, but overall what is the impact on the business risk. Second most important thing when you're talking about alignment with the business goals and objective, this one. So first I'll discuss about this part. Okay, alignment of the business goals and objectives. So risk management depend on the business goals and objectives. So risk practitioner must be very careful not to consider risk from the perspective of one department or one process, but take from the overall as a umbrella of the business goals and everything. So risk management programs serve the organization. So the risk practitioner must remember to look beyond his or her own department. So risk practitioners should keep in mind that some lines of business that are currently prominent may not be a part of the future strategy of the organization. And senior management team may already be planning to move away, from one product line and toward the new emerging product. So objective commitments to the goals of the organization which create a more long-term value, than attempt to predict which business unit may prominent in the future is the best thing. And the best way to understand the goals and objective of the organization is the communication with the senior management. So one thing you need to remember whenever you want to communicate about the business goals, schedule the meeting with the senior management. So risk practitioner should consult with the senior management to gain the understanding of the vision and strategy regarding the line of business, new technologies, future growths, or change in the priorities. And according to that, you can plan your things. So next thing is called as a roles and responsibility. See, risk management may be applied to an entire enterprise under the singular centralized sections, or we can apply the risk management in the one particular project. So we have a functional level integration, which is a valuable in the context of implementation, but decentralized model can make it unclear to whom the risk practitioner should report within the enterprise. So many enterprise may not have a dedicated CRO. Okay, not all CRO report to the CEO also or board of director. It depend upon the business to business. Like if in the banking sector and all that CRO is a profile, but in the product industry we don't have a CRO profile. So within the business function of the risk management, there are number of key roles which should be clearly defined, and it is very important for them to have a clarity who is responsible for the things, who is accountable for the things, who need to be get consulted and who need to be informed. In the CRISC syllabus, they talk about risk manager. That is the one profile we have. Risk manager. Okay, risk manager is a one who responsible for ensuring the risk management functions are carried out to support the enterprise goals and objective. Then we have a second profile which is called as a risk analyst. Okay, risk analyst is the one who responsible for analysis, evaluation, and assessment of the identified threats faced by the enterprise. Okay, and risk analysts are are you can say a primarily focus of technical oriented of the activities and aim to produce and compile the relevant and actionable information. So they are the one who basically providing the information to managers. Then we have another profile which is called as a risk owner. Risk owner. So when you're talking about risk owner, the individual whom the enterprise has invested the authority and accountability for making a risk-based decision. The one who own the laws associated with the realized risk scenario. So senior management board of directors are the risk owner. Then we have another one which is called as a control owner. Control owner. So when you're talking about the control owner, they are the one who individual accountable for ensuring the controls are designed, implement, and operate as planned to keep the risk within acceptable level. And this may be the risk owner also. So organization structures and culture is also another important thing. Okay, so risk manager, risk analyst, risk owner, and control owner. You must have a very good understanding of this. Okay, so summary is manager is the one again responsible for ensure the risk management functions are carried out to support the enterprise goals. Risk analyst is the one who analysis, evaluate and assess the things. Risk owner is the one who own the risk and controller owner is the one who basically own the control. Mostly control owner, risk owner is same. Along with that, in the organization structure, the culture is also play a very important role because structure and culture of organization are critical success factor to the risk management program as they directly influence and inform the staff decisions relating to the risk prevention, risk detection, and risk response effort. So risk management function should have an enterprise mandate that allow the risk practitioner to review and provide the input into all the business process, participate in the incident management activity, and be responsible for reviewing the incidents for the lesson learned and improve the incident response planning, detect and recovery. So that is how we have. Okay. So it's very important risk management as an activity embedded in the culture. So we're talking about the organization culture. What is that? Okay. So risk management is the core part of the corporate governance. Okay, so culture and ethics play a very important role in determining the variance from the defined risk appetite. And variations from the defined risk appetite will be also occur and should be based on the predefined set of criteria to establish the appropriate risk tolerance. So risk culture or risk aware culture is a set of behavior, like example, behavior toward taking risk, behavior toward negative outcome, behavior toward the policy compliance. So these are the example of the risk aware culture we have. It means how you behave. Okay, what is the culture you have? Like example, if there is a risk is there, how you behave toward the risk, accepting, ignoring and all that. Okay, what is the behavior toward the negative outcome if some risk is happen, so you should be very careful about that. Behavior toward the policy compliance, example like we have a four type of things which is called as a vulnerable, which is called as a don't care culture. Then we have a reactive which is called blame culture. One is called as a compliant which is called compliance culture, and one is called as a proactive which is called as a ownership culture. So we need a shift from the don't care culture to the ownership culture. So good risk management program or good organization culture or good risk culture is the one which has a shift from don't care culture. Just give me a second. Don't care culture to ownership culture. So we need a shift from don't care culture to the ownership culture. And that is driven by how you're taking a risk, how you're behaving to the outcome, and how you're behaving to the policy compliance. So risk practitioners should be aware that risk appetite may change over the time on vary on the type of the risk. And the risk appetite required the periodic review also, and depending upon the market conditions. Okay, so that's an important thing we had. Now we have a next thing which is called policies, standard, procedure, and exception management. So risk practitioner should identify the presence or the lack of policy and work to determine whether policies are enforced. That's why if you want to implement a risk management in the organization, the first thing what we need is the enterprise risk policy, because policy talk about why we need. One example I can give you: every system must be protected with a password. That is a policy which is a strategic in nature. Password must be 8 character, that is a standard. How to create a 8 character password, that is basically called as a procedure. Any kind of a deviations we have, that will be captured in the exception management. But if the things are regularly captured in the exception management, then that need to be amended in the policies. Okay, so if policies are not developed and communicated, so enterprise has no mean of enforcing standard of behavior, which increase the risk that behavior may be inappropriate. And lack of enforcement may also lead to the circumvention of the control or increased liability, because the enterprise has admitted the need for the policy but does not follow its own rule. So risk practitioner should assess the risk associated with the policy framework of the enterprise and provide the recommendation as necessary. Where policies are out of date, lack enforcement, are incomplete, the risk practitioner should clearly document the vulnerability and associate risk that pose to the enterprise. But the most important thing we have here is which is called as a exception management. So having a policy, standard, and procedure in place, it is essential, is a part of a operating secure system. But there are maybe cases where exception to the policy, standard, procedure is necessary. So risk practitioner should ensure that exception management process in place and being followed, that exceptions are removed when they no longer needed. So these kind of a key activities we have that we need to understand. Okay. One more important thing from a policy point of view, as we have a four type of major policy which is covered in the CRISC. One is called enterprise risk policy, which define the governance and management of enterprise risk at the strategic, tactical, and operational level, which translate the enterprise governance into the risk governance principle and policies. Then second is called as the information security policy, which talk about the behavior guideline related to the protection of corporate information. Then we have a privacy policy. We set the behavior guideline to protect the information which is deemed PII. And then we also creating a risk tolerance or risk appetite policy, which clearly define the amount of risk the organization is willing to accept in pursuit of the goals and objective. That is what we have. So one example I can show you about the risk management policy. If you notice here, they're talking about the reason, so giving a purpose of the policy, then talk about the scope of the policy, then they talk about the policy statement, then who is responsible and everything. So these are the key activities we have, which is part of the policies. Okay, that is how we can define. So we have some IT risk in relation to the business and other function. As you know, risk is a very critical part of the business. Unless business is willing to take risk, it will not be able to realize the benefit which is associated with the risk. So it's very important risk need to be part of business continuity. Example, the risk which is left after implementing control like earthquake and all that, it need to be part of a business continuity, because we don't have any control currently to prevent the earthquake. So what we did, if anything happened related to the risk and everything, okay, that become a scope of the contingency plan. Okay, earthquake is occur. If it happened, then we have a BCP plan by which we can able to continue in the case of disaster. So this is how the IT risk management is closely linked with the business continuity. So the business functions that is concerned with the preservation of the critical business function and ability of organization to survive an adverse event, okay, impact. So that is we basically try to map it. So if business continuity plan is inadequate or inaccurate, the organization may not meet the goals and recovery after the incident. So that need to be planned here. Risk management also play an important role in the risk and audit. So audit function is important part of a corporate governance that provide the management with the assurance regarding the effectiveness of the control framework. IT risk management program and compliance should be there. So definitely it is not possible for us to audit everything. So we follow the risk-based approach by which we prioritize, right? So risk practitioner should review the relationship between the IS auditor and the area being audited to ensure there is no conflict of interest. Then we have a control risk. The control is chosen to mitigate the risk. If the control is not operating correctly, then the control may not prevent of failure or compromise. So selection of a wrong control, the incorrect configuration of the control, the improper operation of a control is called as a control risk. Okay, and that might be addressed on new threats. We have a associate risk with the projects, which is called as a project risk. So many projects fail. In fact, numerous studies of IT project have indicate the majority of IT project could be considered failure. Okay, so we need to identify the risk associated with the projects, and successfully managing that risk is very likely to result in a higher level of project success and stakeholder satisfaction. Then we have a change risk. Risk is not static, so change in the technology, regulation, business process, functionality, architecture, okay, user and other variables that affect the business and technical environment of the organization, which may affect the level of risk associated with the system in operation. So risk practitioner is basically tasked with managing a risk on a continuous basis, which means he or she must be stay aware of emerging risk that may be associated with the new threats we have. So according to that, we can able to plan the controls. So risk is driven to protect the assets. Asset is anything which basically create a value for the organization. So risk associated with the asset include loss of people, loss of technology, loss of data, trademark and intellectual properties, and business process. So make sure we should give proper attention to that. So this is all from my side, team. And if you find this thing useful, do share in your network and do let me know how do you find this session. Do share your suggestion in the comment box, okay, and give me one example of the risk appetite, risk tolerance, and risk capacity, okay. And I'm also working on the domain 2, okay. Risk part 2 also there, which is called risk governance, which is already I covered from appetite point of view, so I'm not covering that part. But how do you find the session and what kind of video you want in a series? Do share in the comment box. Thank you for watching my video. Have a great day.